Most people think ignoring toxic behavior is enough, but 90% of the time, it just makes it worse. There's a way to neutralize toxic people without confrontation or drama, and it works instantly. Encourage viewers to apply one small strategy today and notice immediate effects. Engage in comments with their experience. Most people think that simply ignoring toxic people is enough to make the problem disappear. They assume that if they don't react, the toxic person will eventually stop their behavior and peace will return. But here's the harsh reality. Ignoring toxic behavior without a strategy almost always makes it worse. Toxic people feed on reactions. They thrive on creating emotional turbulence and observing how their words or actions manipulate others. When someone simply ignores them passively, the toxic person interprets that as either weakness or a new challenge to escalate their behavior. The mind doesn't process passive ignoring as a boundary, it processes it as an opening. You might think you're removing yourself from conflict, but in reality, you're giving them a subtle green light to continue testing limits, observing your reactions, and draining your energy in ways you don't even notice until it's too late. This is why ignoring alone rarely works. It's passive, not proactive. To truly neutralize toxic people, you need a plan that combines awareness with tactical responses. Recognizing that their actions are a reflection of their own issues, not your worth, is the first step. Once you see that, ignoring becomes a tool, but only if paired with psychological strategy. For instance, redirecting the conversation, asking neutral but pointed questions, or maintaining emotional detachment transforms what might have been passive ignoring into active management. You're no longer a target, you're a controlled participant in the interaction. Understanding this principle changes the dynamic entirely. It's also critical to internalize that ignoring without emotional boundaries leaves you vulnerable to subtle forms of manipulation, such as guilt-tripping, backhanded compliments, or passive-aggressive behaviors. Recognizing these patterns and having a tactical mental framework turns the act of ignoring from a hopeful wish into a deliberate, disarming strategy that weakens their influence over your emotional state. In short, ignoring toxic behavior without strategy is like throwing water at a fire and expecting it to go out, when in reality, it only fuels the flames. You need awareness, mental boundaries, and strategic action. Otherwise, the toxic cycle continues, leaving you drained and frustrated while they remain unchecked. The second key point is the tease and payoff, which is all about creating a mental shift in how you approach toxic people, and it's one of the most powerful psychological tools you can use. Most people see toxic behavior as a problem to solve immediately. They react, they argue, or they try to fix the other person, and in doing so, they hand over their power. But the tease and payoff works differently. It's about planting a subtle seed of doubt or uncertainty in the toxic person's mind while simultaneously maintaining your composure and control. The tease is the initial moment where you introduce something unexpected, a calm reaction, a nonchalant question, or a deliberate change in focus that makes the toxic person pause, question their assumptions, or even unconsciously reconsider their approach. This is the psychological leverage point. It shifts the dynamic without confrontation, and it works because it triggers curiosity and cognitive dissonance in them. The payoff comes immediately after. By maintaining emotional neutrality and responding strategically, you allow the toxic person to experience the natural consequences of their behavior without you having to escalate or argue. Instead of reacting, you redirect, reflect, or subtly expose the absurdity of their actions in a way that they notice internally but cannot blame on you. This combination of tease and payoff works on two levels. It protects your emotional state while also teaching the toxic person, without words, that their usual tactics won't control or provoke you. Most importantly, it demonstrates mastery without aggression, which is exactly what they fear the most. The inability to manipulate you. In practice, this could be as simple as asking a neutral but pointed question when they try to attack, smiling calmly in the face of passive aggression, or subtly shifting the conversation to something that highlights their inconsistency without direct confrontation. Over time, repeated use of this technique builds an invisible boundary around you. The toxic person becomes hesitant, unsure, and less likely to target you because their usual scripts no longer work. It's a sophisticated psychological tool that flips the script, keeping you in control and them guessing, and it's far more effective than confrontation, ignoring, or emotional overreaction. The third key point, the engagement spark, is all about grabbing control of the interaction immediately and establishing a psychological presence that makes toxic people think twice before targeting you. Most people underestimate how much influence the way they present themselves can have over a toxic person's behavior. They assume toxic individuals will always dominate unless challenged directly, but that's a trap. The engagement spark is subtle, almost invisible, yet incredibly powerful. It's the moment where you insert energy, curiosity, or intrigue into a conversation in a way that shifts focus from the toxic behavior onto something they can't control. It's about creating a sense of unpredictability without aggression, a mental nudge that triggers reflection in them while keeping you calm. This could be a short, confident statement that reframes the topic, a question that exposes their inconsistency, or even a pause that breaks their expected rhythm. The key is that the engagement spark is not reactive, it's proactive. You're setting the tone, not responding to their attempts to manipulate or provoke. When executed consistently, this technique does something remarkable. It interrupts their habitual patterns, creates uncertainty in their mind, and forces them to consider your presence as an independent force rather than a pliable target. Toxic people rely on automatic reactions from others, fear, guilt, anger, or over-explanation, but the engagement spark prevents them from predicting or exploiting you. Psychologically, it also signals to yourself that you are in control, reinforcing your boundaries and your ability to navigate difficult interactions without emotional depletion. Over time, it establishes a kind of psychological immunity. They learn that their usual tactics are ineffective, which gradually reduces their impact on your life. Importantly, this is not about being flashy or confrontational. It's about subtle, deliberate engagement that flips the power dynamic without creating drama. Even a small spark, one well-timed word, question, or pause, can be enough to destabilize their manipulative momentum while keeping you grounded, calm, and fully in command of the situation. The engagement spark is the psychological equivalent of stepping into the room and making the toxic energy hesitate before it even touches you, and mastering it is the foundation for all the other strategies that follow. Clever redirection is a strategy that transforms interactions with toxic people from draining battles into controlled exchanges, where you maintain authority over the conversation. Most people respond to toxic behavior in one of two ways: confrontation or passive tolerance. Confrontation escalates conflict, while passive tolerance allows the toxicity to seep in, leaving you frustrated and emotionally exhausted. Clever redirection is neither. It's an active psychological tactic that shifts the focus from their negativity back to neutral or constructive territory without appearing defensive or reactive. The principle relies on understanding that toxic people thrive on controlling attention. They want to provoke, manipulate, or unsettle you so that your energy feeds their agenda. By redirecting subtly, you deny them this control while keeping interactions calm and deliberate. This can be done through carefully chosen questions, neutral statements, or changing the topic in a way that highlights their inconsistency without triggering confrontation. For example, if someone begins a manipulative attack, you might respond with a calm question that requires them to explain their logic or reasoning. In doing so, you expose the flaws in their behavior indirectly while maintaining your composure. Redirection works because it interrupts their expected flow, forcing them to adjust while you remain emotionally detached and in control. It's also a long-term psychological tool. Repeated use teaches toxic individuals that attempts to dominate or provoke you will no longer succeed, making them less likely to target you in the future. Crucially, clever redirection does not mean appeasement or avoidance. It's about steering the interaction without escalating or rewarding toxic behavior. Over time, this method builds a protective psychological barrier, ensuring that you engage on your own terms while draining the toxic individual of the satisfaction they normally derive from conflict. Mastery of redirection requires awareness, timing, and subtlety, but once learned, it allows you to handle toxic people efficiently, preserving your mental energy, reinforcing your boundaries, and keeping you calm and centered in any interaction, effectively turning a potential source of stress into a controlled, manageable dynamic. Energy armor is the invisible shield you wear to protect yourself from toxic people, and mastering it is one of the most powerful psychological strategies you can deploy. Unlike physical armor, energy armor operates on a mental and emotional level. It's a conscious boundary that prevents negativity, manipulation, and drama from penetrating your mindset. Most people interact with toxic individuals without this shield, leaving themselves vulnerable to subtle attacks like guilt tripping, passive aggression, criticism, or emotional baiting. The result is predictable: stress, frustration, and a gradual erosion of confidence. Energy armor works because it doesn't confront the toxic person directly. Instead, it creates an internal buffer that keeps their words and actions from affecting your emotional equilibrium. It begins with awareness, recognizing that their behavior reflects their own issues, not your value or capability. Once you internalize this, you can mentally detach without appearing cold or indifferent, maintaining kindness and professionalism while keeping your core energy intact. The next layer of energy armor is selective engagement. You choose what to respond to and what to ignore, filtering out the noise of manipulation and focusing only on interactions that serve or respect your boundaries. Visualization and intentional mindset can strengthen this armor. Imagine a protective barrier around yourself that absorbs negative energy and deflects it harmlessly. Combine this with deliberate breathing, composure, and strategic emotional detachment, and you achieve a state where the toxic person's attempts to provoke, control, or unsettle you simply fail. Over time, energy armor becomes reflexive. Toxic people sense that their usual tactics don't work, and they either escalate unsuccessfully or retreat entirely. Importantly, energy armor isn't about shutting down or becoming unfeeling. It's about protecting your mental and emotional resources while staying fully present and engaged on your own terms. This strategy allows you to navigate complex, high-drama environments without stress, frustration, or exhaustion. By consistently applying energy armor, you reclaim your personal power, maintain clarity and confidence, and ensure that toxic behavior cannot dominate your emotional state or dictate your actions, giving you a decisive psychological advantage in every interaction. Strategic silence is one of the most underestimated tools when dealing with toxic people, and mastering it gives you a level of psychological control that most never realize exists. Most people feel compelled to respond immediately to provocation, criticism, or manipulation, thinking that silence is weakness or acquiescence, but in reality, responding too quickly is often exactly what toxic individuals want. It gives them fuel, satisfaction, and a sense of control over your emotions. Strategic silence is the deliberate choice to withhold reaction at critical moments, creating a subtle but powerful shift in the dynamic. By remaining quiet instead of engaging in an immediate emotional response, you force the toxic person to confront the emptiness of their attack, often exposing the absurdity, inconsistency, or desperation behind their behavior. Silence, when used purposefully, is not passive. It is a form of communication that signals control, confidence, and emotional independence. It interrupts their script, denies them gratification, and establishes an invisible boundary that protects your mental and emotional state. The psychology behind it is simple. Toxic people rely on predictable reactions. They want you to get defensive, upset, or flustered. When you refuse to provide the expected response, you disrupt their pattern, creating uncertainty and internal discomfort for them while keeping yourself calm. Strategic silence can take many forms, from pausing before answering a manipulative comment, to remaining entirely non-reactive in a tense conversation, to selectively ignoring certain attacks while addressing only those that are constructive. Over time, this consistent use of silence reshapes interactions. As the toxic individual learns that their usual methods no longer work, and they either escalate unsuccessfully or gradually retreat. Importantly, silence is not about avoidance or emotional suppression. It's about controlling when and how you expend your energy, giving yourself the space to respond deliberately rather than react impulsively. When combined with other strategies like energy armor, redirection, and psychological reversal, strategic silence becomes a cornerstone of emotional resilience, allowing you to navigate toxic relationships with calm authority, protect your inner peace, and ultimately neutralize the power that others try to exert over you. Psychological reversal is a sophisticated strategy that allows you to neutralize toxic people without direct confrontation by subtly turning their own behavior back onto them, forcing self-reflection while keeping you emotionally untouched. Most people respond to toxicity by arguing, defending themselves, or trying to teach a lesson, which only feeds the toxic person's desire for control and drama. Psychological reversal flips this dynamic by using the toxic person's own words, logic, or assumptions in a way that exposes contradictions or absurdities without triggering aggression. The principle works because toxic individuals rely on predictable reactions, anger, guilt, or fear, from others to maintain their sense of power. By reversing the situation psychologically, you break the script they depend on, leaving them uncertain, unsettled, or even quietly questioning their behavior. This can be accomplished in subtle ways, such as asking calm but pointed questions that highlight inconsistencies in their statements, reframing their attacks to reveal hidden motives, or reflecting back their words in a neutral manner that forces them to process the absurdity of their actions. Importantly, psychological reversal is not about manipulation in the traditional sense. It doesn't involve deceit, provocation, or retaliation. It's about using observation, timing, and calm awareness to let the toxic person confront the consequences of their own behavior without you becoming a participant in the drama. Over time, repeated application of this strategy weakens their habitual attempts to provoke or control you, because they realize that their usual tactics no longer produce the desired outcomes. It also reinforces your own emotional resilience, as you learn to remain composed and strategically responsive even in the face of aggression, criticism, or manipulation. Psychological reversal is particularly powerful when combined with techniques like strategic silence, energy armor, and clever redirection, creating an environment where toxic people have limited influence over your emotional state or decisions. By consistently applying this approach, you establish an unspoken authority that subtly shifts the power dynamic, ensuring that interactions with toxic individuals become manageable, predictable, and ultimately disempowering for them, while you retain confidence, control, and inner peace. The eighth key point is the mid-video call to action, or more broadly, the concept of prompting small, deliberate action, and it is a psychological lever that solidifies learning and empowers control in dealing with toxic people. Most people consume advice passively. They hear strategies, nod along, and think, "That's useful." But nothing changes because knowledge without action leaves the power in the hands of the toxic individual. A mid-action prompt interrupts this passive cycle by encouraging immediate, tangible application of the principles being taught, creating an active feedback loop that reinforces confidence and mastery. In the context of toxic interactions, this could be as simple as challenging yourself to implement one strategy immediately, redirecting a manipulative comment, applying strategic silence during a heated moment, or mentally visualizing energy armor before an expected confrontation. The purpose of this small action is twofold. First, it allows the individual to experience the immediate psychological effect of taking control, giving them proof that the toxic person's influence is not absolute. Second, it cultivates a habit of proactive behavior, which gradually rewires the brain to respond strategically rather than reactively. Psychologically, small wins are disproportionately powerful. They reinforce agency and self-efficacy, which are exactly what toxic individuals seek to undermine. By encouraging viewers or participants to act in a controlled, deliberate way in the midst of learning, The mid-action prompt turns passive understanding into active empowerment, making the strategies tangible rather than theoretical. Additionally, it serves as a reminder that mastery over toxic people is not about confronting every challenge at once. It's about consistent, calculated application of principles that protect your energy, preserve your confidence, and gradually shift the power dynamic. Over time, these small but deliberate actions compound, creating a track record of successful interaction where the toxic individual's attempts to manipulate or provoke are consistently diffused. This approach emphasizes the psychological truth that control over one's own response is the most potent form of power in any relationship with toxicity, and taking small, intentional steps transforms knowledge into resilience, ensuring that the lessons learned are internalized, repeatable, and genuinely effective.